I remember working with people with incredible trauma who had been through horrible things and were in a body that was seen as ideal, weight-wise, and people projected that they must have a fabulous life, and they found that incredibly upsetting. But also, they have what we call thin privilege, which is being able to fit in clothes, seats, life, doctors' offices, whilst if you're in a fat body, you literally and metaphorically do not fit in, and you will have bias against you.
So welcome everybody to today's Good Enough Counsellors podcast, and I'm really delighted today to have Kat Chappell and Jo Reader with me, who are collectively the Fat Counsellors. And some of you will have read that I went on their course last year, and I was really keen to get them into the studio so they could share something about their work and what they do and how they help therapists to think about their own internalised fat phobia. So really delighted to have them here with me today, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. So Jo, shall I start with you?
Yes. Hi, thanks for having us here. It's very exciting. So, I'm Jo Reader, and I am a psychotherapist and supervisor in private practice. Mm-hmm. I live in North Bristol, and I work with teenagers and adults, having had a previous career working with teenagers and schools and parents. Mm-hmm. So a lot of my work is around working with teenagers and parents and all the things that come around that.
Yeah.
And large part of my work is around body image and body shame.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And how about you, Kat?
So hi, my name's Kat Chappell. I'm also based in Bristol. So I'm a counsellor, I'm a supervisor, I'm also a trainer, and I work mainly with people who are struggling with bodies, body image, also themes of abuse as well. I worked at Rape Crisis and Women's Aid for a number of years. And more recently, as I discovered my own ADHD through my client work, I work a lot with ADHD and part of a alliance of counsellors who do the same.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. So tell us a little bit about, how the Fat Counsellors came to be and what it's all about.
Yeah, I'll start with that. So I'm sort of the beginning of the story, and Kat will tell you the end of the story, or the current end of the story. So I retrained to become a counsellor in my mid-30s, and having undertaken some therapy around bodywork, and when it came to choosing my dissertation topic, I decided to look at whether clients can sort of escape the weight stigma that exists in our society when they're in therapy with their therapists. And so I did a autoethnographical piece of research about my own story. Mm-hmm. And we talk about having a fat body, that we are fat, as we use that as a neutral descriptor, and we realise that isn't the case for everybody. That's part of the work. Yeah. And I've always been in a bigger body than my peers, which is kind of a relevant point later on, which we'll come to. So I'm very interested in weight stigma, my own journey. Did this dissertation, and a bit later on, Therapy Today asked me to write an article, an abridged article about it, which I did. And Kat was on her training when this article came out and read it. So I'll hand over to her to tell you the next part.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Jo. So over my 40 odd years of being on this planet, I've sort of been fat and thin and everything in between, and actually had an undiagnosed eating disorder for many years. And so, because I was never what was seen as like a size 0, my body has been scrutinised and told it wasn't good enough. And I held that belief for about 30 years of my life.
Right.
So when I was training to be a counsellor, I still really felt that I could never be a good enough counsellor whilst I was still a fat person. And reading things you mentioned when we before we did the record, Irving Yalom and his fat client who was Betty, the disgust in that. So I was like, well, I'm just never going to be good enough. But then I read Jo's research, as she mentioned, an article in Therapy Today. I read a book called Shrill by an author called Lindy West, and through that and my therapy I was like, maybe being a fat person isn't so bad after all.
Yeah.
So I've done a lot of work in therapy and myself, lots of reading. All this research is relatively new in the last sort of 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I realised how much anti-fat bias existed in the world, certainly. But then through communications from peers, how much in the therapist community.
Yeah.
So it was connecting with Joe going, we've connected before. I love the article. We need to do some training. Joe had some done before. And we started initially training for therapists because you were like, we really need to help sort of give this point of view so that both the therapist and the clients can have a better experience, regardless of the size of the body, but especially if you're in a fat body because of the way the world will treat you.
Yeah. Yeah,
and it's worth saying this took a number of years that Kat made contact with me, as a lot of people do when they find my article, which is so heartwarming. It's 11 years since I wrote it. I still, every year, I will get some emails. It's just amazing.
Oh,
and Kat was one of those people, and we had a bit of a chat. We realised we're both in Bristol, and we'd sort of seen each other's names through networks and things. But we didn't meet. That must have been 2015 or something. Probably you read that. And we didn't actually meet in person until 2022.
Yeah.
And that, in part, was of this fear of what if we do this work? What if we? And Kat kept saying we should do something. And I had quite a bad experience of doing some training with therapists that was fat phobic, and I was very resistant. Kat was very persuasive, and we met, and we started planning some training back in 2022. And I don't think we knew kind of what. We knew we wanted to do something. We knew that we needed to talk about this with therapists. I think we thought we'd probably do one off. Anyway, been doing it for 2.5 years, nearly 3 years now. Worked with about 150 therapists so far.
And come very highly recommended, actually, because I came on your course because people were saying this is such a helpful course to do.
Lovely.
And your sort of first part one of your course is really looking at our own fat phobia, isn't it, and internalised fat phobia. And part two is actually therapists, about working with people in the room, isn't it? So,
and it didn't start out like that. Initially, as Kat was just saying, we thought, let's put something together with, the history that we know and get people thinking about this, get therapists thinking about this. But, what we realised over time is that it's such personal work because we all have a body, and there is a hierarchy of bodies in our society. And that's when we've created 2 courses and split it in 2 so that anybody can come along to part 1, because it is personal development. Part 2 does continue that, but it is much more focused on how you work with this with clients.
Yeah.
You can't do this work without thinking of your own body and how you feel about it.
Absolutely. I'm sure you remember this from when I was on the course. And it's interesting that you said that, when you tried to do it the first time, you had that sort of resistance and fat phobic response, because I experienced that in the course. And, I found myself wanting to disregard what you were saying because of my own internalised fat phobia and thinking, well, they don't know what they're talking about. And of course, you're exactly the right people to know what you're talking about.
I loved that honesty was really helpful, and that is what so many people feel. That will be why a lot of people don't even come on the call, come anywhere near it. Because we do have a huge internalised fat phobia, and we're in denial generally about it. I think, and as therapists, we think we've done all our work.
But actually, it's so ingrained in our culture, isn't it? That
it's talked about on our courses.
Yeah, it's sort of like it's so ingrained that we don't even realise that we've got it. I think that's there's so much prejudice out there, and I think there's some sort of it'd be probably quite helpful just to bust some of the myths at this point. I don't know if you just would sort of tell us about what are some of the common myths that people have about fat and the sort of diet culture, that type of thing. What would you say were the main? It's a big question, isn't it? But
the first one I wanted to do actually was address that, because I've been using the word fat a lot. We call ourselves the Fat Counsellors. Now, there is a part of me from years ago that still cringes and feels uncomfortable with that word. I own it now. For myself and Joe, it's a neutral description in the way you would say somebody is tall, or they're white, or they're a woman or a man or whatever. But it isn't, and that's loaded within itself. That the thing is the challenge. The first myth is that fat is bad.
Yeah.
That fat is fat. You don't have fat. You're not with obesity. I don't like using that word. I think it's pathologising. It's just a descriptor of your body, because human beings are all very different, and that is normal.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I it's such a good point, isn't it? And that kind of fat is bad is like the underlying accepted fact of our society.
Yeah.
It's what I talk about on the course, how the rhetoric around fat is that it's unhealthy, unattractive, it means you're unfit, it means you're potentially unintelligent, lazy,
Greedy.
greedy, don't have good habits or self-control, like those are the assumptions that are out there around fat bodies. And it's extremely challenging to think otherwise. Like I've sat with so many people and they're just like but so many deeply ingrained.
Yeah.
And it is really complex to discuss. There are lots of health myths, which is part of it. There are myths around the kind of solutions, in inverted commas, to dealing with weight and extra weight, let's say, in inverted commas. And so there's a lot of misinformation around that. And of course, attractiveness and beauty is, in the media is a massive part of that. It has nothing to do with health. People will say it's to do with health, but predominantly it is not. But health comes up as the bottom line. It's like, yes.
I wanted to, if it's okay, sort of talk a bit about the roots of it. Now,
Yes.
there is a lot about this, and I'm going to really give you the abridged version. I'd really recommend reading the book Fearing the Black Body by Sabrina Strings. And essentially, it gives a much more detailed version of what I'm going to give you, which is that anti-fat bias is essentially rooted in racism, and it's incredibly ableist. And it shouldn't have a part in our society, but it does. So the short version is that in Western Europe between 16th and 18th century, we've got the transatlantic slave trade. And during that time, race and categorization of race for humans is essentially invented, to say black and white and these things. So two things. White Europeans can recognize who's a slave and who's free. And it also kind of makes this nonsense justification as to why you're enslaving millions of people and treating them as commodities and less than human. So skin colour is a really good identifier to do this. But then after years of being in Europe and having families, there's so many more biracial people that this categorization then goes to body shape and size and food attitudes. There's people originally from or with heritage from African and Caribbean countries tend to have more fat in their bodies than white Europeans, and generally celebrate food and eat more freely. And at that time, they're very Protestant in Europe and very minimal. So they're like, oh, well, that's less than, and we're better than.
Yeah.
The ones with power made up the rules. Interesting. So it was made up to decide who had power and freedom and who did not. And it's still used now.
I thought that was a fascinating part of the course, actually, was learning and digging deeper into that and realising, there's a whole context here and stuff that, again, you just haven't examined, and it has its root in that oppression.
And the BMI.
Oh, yeah, tell us about the BMI.
Simultaneously, there's this Belgian astronomer, statistician called Adolf Quetelet, who is just for fun, for stats, creating a formula to look at the kind of the average body, basically. And he creates a table of height and weight, sound familiar, of white Northern European men. It's basically men from France and Scotland. And he creates this. It's just for stats, just to look at a bell curve, basically. But at some point during this really racist period of during the slave trade and categorizing people's bodies like this, in America, an insurance company goes, hey, here's a good formula that we could use to charge bigger people more. And essentially, that's how it starts. And this formula is used. But it's all over America. Different people use different versions of the formula. So it's totally removed anyway from what Adolf was putting together. But let's not forget, that was white Northern European men. So that's all it's useful for. And then once the insurance companies are using that, the medical
community
commandeer it as well, because in America these things are all paid for, and their systems, so it becomes something to be able to charge more people with, and that's where that stemmed from. It's not based on any health
and it's sort of scientific.
It's not,
and yet it's such a rod to beat people with, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is
It's
sensible.
really scary because now this data is used to gatekeep people from like life-saving surgeries, being parents, whether that's through IVF or adoption, and generally makes fat people feel scared of medical professionals, ashamed of being in a body, basically on all the way from a table in the 1830s. It's not fit to show health. It's fit to show what is your height and weight ratio. And to
Yeah.
say that there's a small band for everyone, 18 to 108, male, female, regardless, race, class, everything, for everyone to fit into, actually is just bananas.
Yeah, when you
Rather
sort
than
of,
just looking at a person and seeing if they're healthy or not by a medical professional, rather than going, table says wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, it is when you break it down, you think, yeah, how can that tell us anything about health?
Yeah.
But it is used, as Kat says, people are denied routinely, like this is absolutely commonplace every time a fat person will visit. And I mean, not even fat people. We're talking people who just slightly fit out of that very small window of what's described as a normal BMI will be denied all sorts of things. It's absolutely rife.
Yeah. And the other thing that sort of it's reminding me of is tell us about the blood pressure cuff and the way that blood pressure can be affected if you're bigger and they try and measure you with a blood pressure cuff that's smaller. Because this is something that really sort of like, oh my goodness, that you told us about on the
Well, yeah,
course.
a small blood pressure cuff will give you a wrong reading. So the wrong size blood pressure cuff will give you an incorrect reading. It will give you a high reading.
And it hurts.
Well,
Yeah.
it really hurts.
Yes.
If you have the correct size one, which now Kat and I asked for at our GP surgery, there's only one in the building, I think, so they have to go rooting through drawers. There's not routine. I mean, it's just bizarre. And if you get the right one, and all is well,
right
you get a
reading.
good reading.
Yeah. And yet if you've got the wrong one, you may have they might basically give you a false positive for high blood pressure. Yeah. Yeah.
And if you don't know that those exist, and if you don't feel empowered enough to ask for one, you're just going to be written off as high blood pressure. And it's going to be seen as it's because you're in a bigger body, because you're fat. And actually, sadly, everyone can get high blood pressure. It's part of life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, there is no single condition that only fat people get. So, to think about those kind of myths, the idea that fat causes, there is no evidence that fat actually causes anything.
Yeah.
And there are various statistics and there's science, and people would resist that idea that like fat, how can fat not cause stuff? And I guess I can see you nodding as well. And I remember, that is so ingrained that it's almost impossible to understand.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the other things that was sort of like really blew my tiny little brain was when you talked about the benefits of fat as well. And something that really sort of like told a lot of people about is how being fat in menopausal women is actually helps their bones be stronger. Yes. It's sort of like you think, huh? It's sort of like, yes, our bodies put on weight because that's probably going to help our bodies. And you just sort of think, God, we spend so much time sort of resisting weight gain and stuff as we become
And in the beginning and the end of life, more weight is better than less weight. Fundamentally, being human, babies that are born really underweight, have a less chance of survival. And bodies that are bigger in the end, or when we get more serious conditions, the statistics say, the science says the survival rate and the recovery rate is so much better. We're not wasting away at the same time.
And also more padding, because when your bones are more brittle, if you're falling, there's more between you and the surface, so there's less chance of breakages and harm.
Yeah.
And the thing is then, people go, you say it's better, and it's like, no, we're just not saying it's worse. It's one of those things. What's better, tall or short? Tall, you can reach more things, but you can't fit us into many places. It's saying like, it's nuance, and there might be some people where their weight is interfering with their health. It's not about saying, we love a binary, and we like a simple solution, isn't it? Because it's such a solution, and the diet industry is worth like £316 billion at the moment. That the solution is, if you're sad, be thin. If you feel unattractive or don't have a partner, be thin. If you're unhealthy, be thin. And it's like, oh, and how do we do this? Oh, just buy these things, sign up to this thing. But I think, as Aubrey Gordon, Fat Activist podcast legend, says, that, if you think diet books and stuff like that has existed since the 1940s, and if they haven't worked it out by now, maybe it's just not a thing. Actually, most of your body size determinant will be genetics. You look at people with birth families and you you can tell what size your body's going to be. And if it's not that family, it's normally a grandma or an aunt. It's one of those things that most people are fighting against their genetics, and those with genetics that fit into, what's considered the right category, go, well, it's easy. And it's like, well, yeah, because you're just there. It's just one of those things. It's like, I'm not better because I'm white. Genetic fate made me white, and we live in a white supremacy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've got Aubrey Gordon's quote here. She said about that, diets haven't worked in any decade. Why would they start working now? All scientific evidence suggests the contrary. And I know people say, but they do work. I lost weight. And what we mean is they do work in the short term, because our bodies were always designed to be able to survive the winter and famine. But they are also designed then to store when we get it back again. And so in the short term, yes. And the first time, it's quite easy to lose weight. But every time we do it, the body will fight against it. We often talk about it's like holding a pool float under the water. It will pop up. Or holding your breath. Eventually, you will take an enormous breath. And that's what happens with the body. And that it changes the metabolism every time we do it. And so this idea that the solution to all the, if there are health issues which we would challenge, there isn't evidence for the connection between those things. But even if there was, the solution to it doesn't have a very good success rate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if people are really interested in health, the science says weight loss and the way people lose weight, historically particularly, isn't really particularly healthy.
They call it weight cycling, going up and down, up and down.
Yeah.
The best thing is to be generally consistent. And then often, you drop a dramatic amount of weight. Often that's a precursor for illness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, if you haven't, if there's no intention to do that, absolutely.
Yeah. It's absolutely fascinating. Can we think about, so how does this come into the therapy room? Tell me about something about your work with therapists, helping them to sort of think about their attitudes within the therapy room. Because Kat and I were just talking about the famous Irvin Yalom thing, and when he talks to Betty and he never lets on that he's, so fat phobic. And then at the end, she calls him out and says, I always knew you were. Let's talk about in the therapy room and how sort of our diet culture and fat phobia impacts our relationships with clients.
Yeah, I mean this is so important, and I think however much we talk about all those myths and whatever, it's useful to understand that, because I think that's it's the gateway into kind of going, I need to understand this a bit more. But ultimately our job in the room is not to be assessing our clients' health at all. I mean, that's just not, mental health, of course, we're working with that, but judging and whatever, that's not what we're there to do. And so it's bringing people back to that. Unfortunately, what happens, because we haven't done our work on this, is that it can seep into the room. And Irvin Yalom is a great example of how it seeps into the room, and your client will know.
Yeah.
And, we all have bodies. There is a hierarchy of bodies in our society. Let's not pretend we are not noticing that. And there was a study written about how, particularly because I think this is a really interesting concept, the sort of one-sidedness of the work that we do, which is how it should be, means that we're not revealing, very much personal information. And so it results in our bodies acquiring a particular significance in particular. And so there's a whole kind of thing there, which we haven't got time to go into today, around how we're being perceived and trusted. There's all of that going on and not talked about. And I guess the main part of our work is about how counsellors' unconscious bias, because of all the things we've just talked about, mean that they can accidentally collude, talking about how much they ate over Christmas, all that kind of stuff. How it's very innocently done. And often well-intentioned. So there's things like that go on. And the other thing I think we don't we're not aware of, and we have started to see in our work, is that attitudes about weight, eating and dieting present in all our female clients, irrespective of size, irrespective of age, culture, backgrounds. And, you know, we really see that, don't we, in our workshops, Kat, how, you know, what was really surprising was how many different types of bodies come along, and not anyone doesn't have a story about how their body isn't good enough.
Yeah. They haven't been mistreated due to their size or had a disordered relationship with food.
Yeah.
I think another danger is missing eating disorders and disordered eating, because there is a thing that it's a bit of a crass term, but it's what they call swag, which stands an acronym for skinny white affluent girls. Those are the only ones with eating disorders, when actually I think it's a very small percentage, and I wish I had the percent with me.
6% of people with eating disorders are in bodies that are deemed underweight by the BMI.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So it's actually, the vast majority of people are actually not in these skinny bodies. Yeah. Right.
It's not about the body size. It's about the relationship with food and how it's making them feel. And we have our bodies in the room. So like you said, it might be a bit different with online if you're only seeing from head to sort of mid-chest. But your body is in the room and it's saying something to the client, and what that might communicate might not. So if you are in a smaller body than your client, the client will feel that generally that there is privilege there, or that your life is better, those sorts of things, or that you're judging them. And it's important, we always say this is one of the biggest pieces of advice, just name that. When somebody's like, I don't like my body, I feel it's X, Y, and Z, just to go, and how is it to talk about that with me in the body that I'm in? And you don't have to put a judgment of it, because, you know, I know if I said a fat body, you know, people feel, because I'm a fat person, I notice clients feel like, ugh, and they're like, oh no, I love Lizzo, it's fine. You know, that's where I have to go, look, I understand, I'm in a fat body, I've done my work with that. You can say whatever you want and I will not be upset. I want you to really honestly be with your experience, even if it feels it's negative or it might impact me.
Well, and it's that, like, whatever body you're in, it's saying that, how is it, just bring it into it, how is that discussing it with me in the body I'm in? You know, we know it's so comparison, so, you know, but it's allowing for that discussion, because it will be there, it will be going on, whatever body type.
I remember working with people with incredible trauma, who had been through horrible things and were in a body that was seen as ideal weight-wise, and people projected that they must have a fabulous life, and they found that incredibly upsetting. But also what they didn't experience, which is what people in bigger bodies do, is they have what we call thin privilege, which is being able to fit in clothes, seats, life, doctors' offices, whilst if you're in a fat body, you literally and metaphorically do not fit in, and you will have bias against you. And it's also recognising in the way that, you know, we need to do training around LGBT community, around race, around all of these determinants. It's important for you to recognise and know the social pressures and the environment that your client is in.
Yeah, because I mean, you know, we don't know what we don't know, or what we haven't experienced. And I'm always struck how people do one of the things we do on part 1 course is look at all the ways that people who are fat are stigmatized in daily life. And I'm always struck how people are like, I did not know that. You know, I did not know. I mean, blood pressure cuff is a great example, but even gowns in hospital, they don't fit. It's so undignified. You can't get eye laser surgery if you're over a certain weight, and it's quite low, because the machine's it's not been designed for that weight. You know, there is, and that's just health stuff. Never mind just trying to go to the theatre or get on a bus. Or it's you know, or watching telly, you know, and how people are portrayed, and the messages in the adverts and stuff. You know, it is everywhere. What Aubrey Gordon says, you know, it's in the water we swim in, isn't she? You know, it's the air that we breathe. It is just there. We can't afford to ignore it. And that's what all our work is about, is raising this awareness. And it is really difficult to face. You know, we don't want to look at this. And there's a lady called Laura Brown who was the only book I found when I was doing my dissertation. There's loads more now, but I was doing this in like 2011. And she'd done this piece of work in 1989 about fat oppression in therapy. And she recognises this is like a uniquely difficult and painful task, because we are asking people to call into question things that they have governed their entire life, and their mother's life and their grandmother's life. That's about all the time. It's part of, and there's a statistic that says this is what women bond over the most. And I know it affects other genders, but it's predominantly a real female problem, and it has been historically. But it's what they bond over the most, which is kind of sad, isn't it? But that conversation about food and eating and dieting of bodies is what people kind of gravitate towards.
Absolutely. I always remember a friend of mine years ago, she said, because she doesn't believe in diets, and she said, you know what, she said, you can't get together with a group of women without somebody being on a diet. It's just, it's so endemic, isn't it? Yeah.
I definitely can't get together with people without, there being some diet talk or some excuse about the food you're eating.
Yeah.
I used to notice that particularly in office culture, people eating their lunch and making an excuse about I didn't have much breakfast, or, when there's cake on our birthdays, which is lovely way to celebrate, people kind of go, oh, well, I can't have a piece of cake because, or I won't. That's what we mean about it just being sewn into everyday life.
Yeah.
And to just say a bit more about that, kind of finding a space where that doesn't talk. That is the other thing that really comes out of our, like almost every feedback we get is, it was so amazing to be among, especially with people who are fat, in a community of people where we can talk about this and it's understood, just completely understood, and they don't have to explain or worry about, and it's beautiful to have created that. Really, it's such an honour.
Yeah, it's a sort of safe space, effectively, isn't it?
Exactly.
And yet that is what we should be doing with our clients, shouldn't it? I mean, that's what we would want to create for our clients, to give them that.
It's hard. It is really hard. There is a way we run our courses with so much compassion and absolutely no shame for anybody's views. And I hope you can vouch for that.
Yeah.
We really encourage people to be able to voice that, because it's only through doing that we can start to dismantle it and think differently about it.
Yeah.
It is really, really challenging.
Yeah.
To go there and stop and kind of go, maybe not all I've been told is truth.
Yeah. It's interesting, actually, because what I've realised recently is how, I guess, sort of like how I've used weight, how I've tried to use my weight to control other people's opinions of me. It's sort of part of that sort of pleasing people thing, and sort of like that sense, of course I can't control that, but how restricted I've been in my being, in what I do, because I want to control people according to this standard of what's acceptable in terms of weight. And it's just really hit me recently. That's, something that I've done. And also, I think as I've moved into being bigger, it's just like you say, you sort of realise how you've had that thin privilege, clothes always fitting me and that sort of stuff. And so it's been quite interesting to sort of work with you, and also to see this coming out in my own, sense of self, really, and letting go of that. I think it's been fascinating. Yeah.
And the letting go, like we know as therapists, the letting go of anything brings all sorts up, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We want to hold on to the things that, like you say, the things that have helped us control and navigate all sorts of things in life. Who wouldn't want to be more accepted by everyone and everything, and have more access and to get better treatment? It's so understandable that we would want to do that. And
yet it's so awful as well that there are people who are excluded from that because of our societal sort of attitudes, isn't it? Like Kat was saying, before she did the work and reading that Irvin Yalom story, just how ashamed it made her feel to read these awful words that he says about things. And I guess, I hadn't considered really the impact that could have on somebody, to read something like that. Yeah.
So I remember now, actually, in the training, because it's interesting, I'm back doing the training back where I started.
Yeah.
They had these seats with arms that at the time I could just about fit into.
Yeah.
And we were doing some sort of Gestalt experiment, and they were like, just see how you feel sat in this chair. How do you feel? And I think I just blurted out. I went, I don't fit. Because I didn't. I was always in pain, but of course I'd never say anything because people might notice I was fat and that'd be shameful. And I was just like, I don't fit, and I feel awful and I feel ashamed, and people were like, oh, but you're like really pretty, but like, you run so much, you'll probably be fine. And people were trying to be kind, but actually that wasn't the point. The point is the chairs are wrong.
Yeah.
The chairs are wrong. And so everything that I've done now, I'm 10 years later, I'm able to walk in there and go, these chairs aren't right, and this
Yeah.
is too big, and I don't fit here. And that's taken a lot to do that. But before, I was so ashamed that
Yeah.
people notice. It's that thing of we're told to compete for size and, to fit in. I remember when my daughter was saying, oh, it's hard to sit on the carpet because this kid is bigger. And I said, maybe the carpet's too small.
Yeah.
And she was like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's that thing, all these little things have an impact and they notice. I remember I had a counsellor where I was with this stuff, and I think I criticised myself for being fat because something else had happened. And I said, and I know it's not my fault, and I noticed an eye roll.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
And then I shut down and was like, okay, you're not safe. I am never going to talk about that again.
Yeah.
Because you think it is.
Yeah.
And then we were in quite a thin body, and I was like, yeah, I don't trust you.
Yeah.
But I wasn't as confident as I am now to walk off. Like now, when I go to see a practitioner, I say, I'm fat and that's fine, and I don't want you to talk to me about diets.
Yeah.
And then if anyone's a bit, well, I'm like, no, okay, bye-bye. But, I couldn't do that 10 years ago, and many people can't, and understandably so. And it shouldn't have to be that you have to, aggressively advocate for yourself every time you do anything.
Actually, explicitly say, I am not going to talk to you about diets. It's just sort of like, it's just, yeah, it's awful, really, isn't it? To think that would be, you have to defend yourself against that sort of thing.
But I mean, that's happened to me too, and this is why we do this work, because we have, oh my God, and everyone has a story when we start talking about this. I saw a counsellor many years ago now, and I was talking about work issues, and I happened to mention, I came back from the gym, which I go to at lunchtime because it was like something to do, and she said, and what about your weight? Just like that. And I was like, what, sorry?
What about my weight?
And it was quite a long time ago, and I'd started on my journey, and she was like, well, let's talk about it. And I was like, oh,
let's not.
No, I don't. And she was like, no, but you're going to the gym and you're trying to work on it. And I was like, no, I just go to the gym because it's like underneath work and I get it free, and I like to move. And she was like, yeah, and how much weight have you lost? I was like, no, I'm not. No. but look at the kind of, it's horrible. I never went back. And look at the kind of assumption. She couldn't even see what she was doing. And it's just so common. And that's why I do this work.
Yeah.
And just pick up a bit about what Kat was saying there. This is what comes into the therapy room, which we, must pay attention to, is that everybody thinks it's their fault. If you are fat, or even just in that kind of overweight category, which actually just isn't in remotely anywhere like a big body.
You're told you are.
Yeah, but you're told you are. You think it's your fault. The rhetoric says you have caused this because that's what that's what we've been told from the beginning. And so, as Kat was saying, and I felt this too, I never talked about it with anyone because of the shame of having done this to myself.
Yeah,
too strong, and I couldn't bear anyone else saying that to me. And when I started doing this work, I was like, I haven't done anything to create this. I just like existing, doing what everyone else does. And I remember as a teenager being like, I don't really understand why I'm bigger. Like I just eat the same as everyone else. And really excruciating when people's lunchbox, I'm like, same. Except my mum was already put me on a diet by then. And, and it's like, now I know it's just my genetic destiny. Always been. And the shame and stigma, and if we want to talk about health, shame and stigma and discrimination causes a lot of health issues. We know that about other issues. And there is a lot of talk about how if there is a correlation between fat and health, could it be all stigma and discrimination? And that is the thing, as therapists, we absolutely need to be aware of. People will be coming with that, and that is what we need to pay attention to. And if we collude and think, well, it is your fault, we won't help them.
Yeah.
And it's also ableist. I think we live in an ableist society, which is this assumption that you must be healthy. And if you're not, you have a moral deficit. So it essentially trashes all disabled people, anyone with chronic illness. And essentially, if you are a human in a body with cells, you're going to get ill. And things are going to happen. And that's scary. And what's useful is to go, but if I do all the things, the protective totems, of be thin, apparently, do the exercise, do these things, then I will be safe. And it's like some of those things can up your odds a little. But the more you are in the world, and especially given whatever your genetic determinants, especially stuff like, diabetes, essentially not a sugar caused thing, it's a genetic mainly, and it happens to thin people, it's going to happen. And that sucks. And wouldn't it be nice to be able to do something to prevent it?
Yeah.
And the knowledge that you can't, they say, well, it says on the NHS website. And I'm like, it does. But if you look at the words, it says weight loss may help symptoms. Well, it says may. It never says definitively.
Never says. It's really interesting once you look. It never says it will, because actually there is absolutely no scientific proof that it will.
Really?
There is none.
Yeah.
If anything, the outcomes say there are worse outcomes if you lose weight, for example, with diabetes. There is a great, we must signpost people to something called the Hayes Health Sheets, and that's HAES, which stands for Health at Every Size. Which is an interesting concept. The Hayes Health Sheets will talk through all of these kind of common conditions that are thought to be caused by weight, or that weight loss will improve. It's a great resource.
That's definitely one I think I'm going to go and have a look at. Yeah.
Well, I think there's this myth that if you are thinner, you will feel better. And there is something in that, because you will be treated better.
Yeah.
And you will treat yourself better and feel generally from being treated well and fitting clothes and people going, hey, you look great. I had that. I lost a significant amount of weight just because I was incredibly unwell. And people are like, ooh, that suits you. And I'm like, no, I'm horrible. I don't have an appetite. I feel really awful. And, so it's that thing when a client's like, I want to lose weight. Now, I'm not going to be like, no, you must stay your size and you're not allowed to do these things. No, never. You never do that. As you would with anything, you go, okay, well, tell me more. What does that actually mean? When you're in this body of this determinate size, what will that mean for your life? Actually, can you do those things now? Is that actually stopping you? Because sometimes, yes, it is, as in getting a medical treatment where you've got to have a BMI. Is it actually, I can't go out, I can't date, I'm not allowed these things? Then no, maybe you could just do it then.
Yeah.
Actually, how do we get to your goal?
Well, and there's two things. One, often people who have lost weight will say, oh, I wasn't any happier. Yes, there may be better treatment, but actually our problems don't actually go away because you're smaller. No. People will also say, but I feel better when I lose weight. And there are two reasons for that. One is it's actually really hard to go against nature and restrict. And there can be real pride in that willpower.
Yeah.
I mean, I get that. But also and Kat knows this statistic, I think, there is something scientific that happens when it's nature. So if we were in famine, it gives us this boost so that we'll go and hunt a bit more food. We'll go and find it so we don't just wither away. So we do get this sense of euphoria when we initially lose weight.
Oh, wow.
So it's evolutionary. It's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, our bodies are so incredible, the way it responds like that. But it isn't because, oh, now I'm healthier. It's so convenient, isn't it, to connect it to that?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it links to a wider capitalist thing of, there's a pride in denying our needs. Of like, I don't need to go to the doctor. I don't need to eat very much. I don't need to. Why? It's like, oh, if I need to eat a lot, if I feel I'm addicted to food. And it's like, but if you hold your breath, as soon as you unhold it, you go, am I addicted to air? Yes, because otherwise I will die.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and we don't do the same things around drinking water. We don't say, I'm not going to drink as much today. I'm going to abstain and see how long I can go. Or, and we wouldn't say we were addicted to water. And yet food, we do talk about that. We need food. It's not, and I know that there are obviously some people who feel out of control with food. I do understand that. But it's always worth asking what people mean when they say that, because they might say, I eat 4 biscuits instead of just none, or, and sometimes it's much more extreme. But I always just say, tell me a bit about what you mean about overeating or being addicted to food, because it's often not really.
It really reminds me of a quote that sticks with me by Dr. Deb Burgard, which is, in order for us to effectively treat eating disorders, we first must make it safe to be fat.
So tell us a little bit about when's your next course coming up, if people would like to come along, and how can people find you?
Yeah, thanks, Jo. We run our part 1 course in the autumn. And we do currently we do weekly 6 weeks on Friday lunchtime to try and fit around people's work. It's for an hour and a half. And so that next one is starting on the 12th of September. And you can go to our website, which is the fatcounsellors.co.uk, and find everything there that you need to sign up.
Yeah.
And then we run part 2 in January and February.
Yeah.
And we've also got a one-off in-person workshop coming up. It's in Bristol, hosted by Network, which is a therapy and training centre. The details are also on the website, and that is for part 1, so that's in June.
Yeah.
And also we have a video version of part 1 that you can buy from the site, and you can use at any time.
Yeah, and it's up to 4 hours CPD, which is, and it's great, and you can do it in your own time, and you can break it up. It's in sections, so you can do it in your own time, which for a lot of people coming into a group and talking about this is too much, but they want to do the work, so that's why we've managed that.
Although also I will say, from having attended the Friday lunchtime ones, it's also very powerful to be in the group as well, isn't it? And I certainly found it really helpful to listen to other people's experiences, and I just, it was really eye-opening actually, as to hear how other people had experienced life, really.
And seeing people, all sorts of different people, and hearing the commonalities and learning things you don't know, and feeling so safe. It is amazing. I think you're right. I think for some people, being able to do it at home is right. But some people have said they felt they've missed the opportunity to do it together. And of course, some people also want to do it in person. So that's why we try and create as many options as possible for everybody's needs.
As for me, because it was the sort of first time I delved into this whole sort of subject, it was so interesting and helpful, and really, made me think a lot about my own attitudes, to others, but also my attitude towards myself as well. And I think it's sort of ongoing work.
It did impact you, didn't it? I know that you did a post afterwards about your clothes.
That's right. I've sold them all on Vinted, all my thin clothes.
Yes.
That's so, it was great. Again, it's that, let's not just stare at the clothes that don't fit anymore and feel bad about it. How did that feel?
Oh, a huge relief, actually. Yeah, just to let go of them and to let someone else enjoy them as well. Because I think that's sort of, sometimes you sort of look at clothes, you think, oh, I really loved wearing that. And then you think, it doesn't fit me anymore. So let's send it off to somebody who can have equal pleasure from wearing it.
But, when we're children, we grow out all the time. It's natural, isn't it? You grow out of clothes, they don't fit. And it's sad. I give quite a few of mine to cats, little children, younger than mine, and they get, it's nice I get to see them worn again.
Yeah.
But there's no shame, there's sadness sometimes in giving clothes, but there's a shame in that. And I think it's a really interesting way to think about, if things don't fit us anymore, give them to someone else who can enjoy.
Yeah. There's this brilliant article, and it's Anne Patchett, and she says she shares it every year in January. And there's sort of 2 things that I think were really lovely. She said when she used to see her therapist, and she'd say to her therapist, I'm going to go on a diet. And the therapist would say, great, how much weight do you want to put on? I think it's absolutely brilliant. And then eventually, she did all the work. She didn't say it any longer. And then the other thing that she said is, why do you let a pair of trousers have an opinion about you? If they don't fit, just don't wear them.
Oh, I love that. And you can
that.
say the same about a number. Why do we let it define ourselves and be ashamed about? I had a client recently who was saying, I couldn't buy that size, even though it fitted beautifully and looked great in it. Couldn't buy that size.
Yeah.
I've said before, cut the label out if you need to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if weighing is distressing, don't weigh yourself.
Absolutely.
Unless you've been anaesthetised or launched into space, you don't need to know how much you weigh.
Yeah.
You just really don't. It's very rarely that's a useful number. And it can be so triggering. There's so many judgments about it. So why don't you just free yourself from that?
Yeah.
Yes, this idea of everyone having scales in their house, you don't really need it. You can tell if there's any, clothes will tell you very quickly if there's been a shift.
Yeah.
And I think the idea about, if it was a health measure, it's an easy way to have in your home to check. But because it isn't, and what it does is triggers, much more awful feelings. Usually, it doesn't. People don't feel good usually standing on scale. Just don't have them in the house.
Yeah.
You don't need to know.
Yeah. Absolutely. I know we could go on talking about this for ages, but I know that so certainly some of you have got other things to go on to. So thank you so much. It's been absolutely fascinating to have you on the podcast, and I will put your details in the show notes as well so people can find them. But, we've just sort of touched the tip of the iceberg really in what we've talked about today. So thank you so much for coming and just maybe opening up the subject for people and maybe encouraging them to think about it some more for their sakes and for the sakes of their clients as well. So thank you.
Well, thank you for letting us talk about
Thanks
it.
so much.
Thank you.
I love having an opportunity to help spread the word.
Absolutely, yeah. And
Different
such an important thing. Thank you. Thanks for listening. Do come and join my Facebook community, Good Enough Counsellors. And for more information about how I can help you develop your private practice, please visit my website, josephinehughes.com. If you found this episode helpful, I'd love it if you could share it with a fellow therapist or leave a review on your podcast app. And in closing, I'd love to remind you that every single step you make gets you closer to your dream. I really believe you can do it.